So we've actually got an official figure for how many Reform councillors Reform have actually lost since May. It's 5%. So that's in percentage. But what does that, of course, as we always say, work out in numbers? Well, turns out Politics Home did a big deep dive on this. But even then, I know this is actually out of date on this because some have even left since then. It's not very good, to be honest, when you go through this. But I can tell you this. In this article we're about to go over in a bit, and I'll go over today's question. They've lost about 36. They've lost 36 since May. They won a total of, at May, at 677, and they've lost 36 councillors since then. That's not good. Not only that, but you've actually got to look at what they're doing on these councils. And the biggest problem we will always bring up is the fact that a lot of the stuff, they aren't doing anything. They're not putting forward any, policy, or they're not doing anything really that too great. And a lot of people will go, oh, that's great. They're doing nothing. So it's all good then. And then you have to turn around and go, no, that's just as bad, because these people aren't turning up for meetings, meaning that important decisions aren't being made. They're not turning up to scrutiny meetings, meaning that, scrutiny isn't then, being able to do. Sometimes on finance matters, where we are coming up to the budget in, less than a month, a budget has to be put forward by these, councils to the cabinet at December, which will then go to the full council in January, which then goes to budget committees then in February. That's how the process goes. Will some of these councils be able to meet these deadlines? Leicester, I will tell you now, that is good. Leicestershire is, shall we say, not Leicester, Leicestershire, shall we say, looking very dodgy on that one. Meanwhile, of course, you've got Darren Grimes up in Durham freaking out still almost every day about stuff because for some reason, remember, he's in charge of finance. Someone thought it would be a good idea to put him in charge of the budget for Durham Council. And remember, that's not his only job, because he's also deputy leader and in charge of communications. Now, why has this ultimately happened? Why has this ultimately happened? And I think it comes down to a very, very key phrase. We've all seen this. If you have any interest in local politics in your area, anything like that, you know that there is the reality and there is the perception, right? The perception for local government, and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong or anything like that about this, but we all see it. We all see it. Everyone else who I know who talks about local government, this is a big problem. It doesn't get talked about enough. That is because, especially local government, so few people actually care about what happens in their local council building. They do not realize the importance of actually what happens in your local council, why electing local councils is probably so important, so that you actually have a democracy, you actually have a say on what goes on in your local area. Otherwise, why have councillors at all? And bear in mind, I can guarantee you now, there's a couple of you. I know you're already looking at your TV screen going, but yes, I know a couple of you. I know full well have seen comments over the years on social media, etc. I've even spoken to people when it comes to the issue of local politics. Why even have local councillors? At that point, why even have any local democracy at all? But no, local councillors are important. They do function a very, very, very important role. I've said this before. What goes on in Westminster is just as important what goes on in your town council or in your county council or even in your now mayoral regional office. You know, because a couple of you have got new regional mayors recently. You know, how many people know who their regional mayors are if you know you've got one recently, or what they are doing? What did they actually run on? How can you actually know that they've been doing a good job if you haven't even been following this along? And next time it comes to vote for them, how are you going to do that? Oh, that's right. Most people probably won't. And as a result, we've seen this every time. Turnout for local elections, dire. Absolutely dire. In my area, last time we had a local election, it was 25%. That was dire. There was awful, awful, awful turnout. And you worry and you wonder why I'm so worried about the upcoming May's local elections. We are probably going to go reform, and it's not going to go well. I am probably end up going to have to cover the chaos and stuff going on at my local council. You know, and bear in mind, covering what we've been going through so far since May, yeah, it really does make me worry. Makes me worry very, very much so. You know, I have seen some of the stuff that our local council has done for the past couple of years, regenerating our new town centre, putting it in a really good direction in a way that we've done it. I would say now it would be very hard to say which town has the best town centre in the UK. I would be willing to say this now that Barnsley Town Centre is in the top 10. Like, generally, no, not even that. I would say top 5. I'm going to even go further than that. Top 5. I think that's how good a job our local council has done that. And it has done it because it has had councillors that have supported that as well, that have pushed for that. That is why it's so important to have good councillors who know what they're doing. The biggest problem is that there is perception and reality. The reality is your council may be doing very good. Sure, it will have problems. All councils have problems. You know, it's the same in business. No business is ever 100% perfect. There will always be problems. But it is not this disaster, doom and gloom, waste, fraud, and abuse that reform have tapped into. You know, oh, don't worry, put us on. We'll sort all this mess on your local council out. Well, guess what? Lots of these guys, they currently run 12 different councils at the moment. It's not like they've been sorting any of the mess out there. The policies that they have decided to implement have been really weird. We've seen Nottinghamshire Council decided to go, oh, yeah, we're going to spend 500K on toilets for a building that we don't even use currently because, oh, we might use it in the future. You know, let's spend 75K on flags. Honestly, it it's so weird, some of the stuff we've seen. This also leads into funding issues as well, because obviously the government grants, you know, these reform councils, I guarantee you, have not been applying for these government grants. Or if they have done, they might end up getting those grants because, well, you know, maybe the councillors haven't then turned up, or, you know, they've now said, as we've seen in the case of Durham, yeah, we're not going to spend any money more on that direction anymore. Except here's the problem. You then cannot take that money you've already allocated for that spending to then put it into something else. Government just ends up taking that money back because that's what that money was allocated to spend for. But then guess what? In the case of Durham, where they're not going to build these solar panels anymore on the council office roofs, they've still got to pay all the contractors because all the contracts and stuff, etc., have already been signed. And yet they're backing out of it now, knowing full well he's going to bring a lot of waste. I worry so much. I do worry so much. And yet the whole point of this was to go over this little article that we I'd seen today from Politics Home. You know, reform is losing unusual elective councillors, of course, elected since May unusual, right? So they had a guy, director of Travellers, director of London LSE. He said this was, of course, a very unusual number, and of course, very rapidly growing so soon after reform did in May of this year. Is of course slightly relative though, since of course the numbers are bigger. Of course, what has happened in Westminster, the reform of course lost 5 MPs, had 4 and then 6 MPs voraciously over these months since July of 2024. He told Politics Home. Yeah, it reflects in the numbers of MPs as well. Talks about what happened to Rupert Lowe, you know, with comments about Zia Youssef, James Murdoch, again, booted from the party. I think they're going to try probably bring him back at some point on this. And then this is where it gets odd. He said, what is the root of this, particularly, of course, at the local level, is that Reform, of course, doesn't have the experience of vetting people who have come forward to stand in elections at any level. Travels continue. He added that the older and, of course, more established parties have learned, of course, this the hard way in previous years, and have now had a very clear sense, of course, of people's background. Travers put the high number of community reform, of course, councillors losses down to a combination of factors, including having a large number of candidates up for election, again, which is true. They will just say, hey, stand to be a councillor, and they just put anyone forward. We've seen this with people who have had, you know, weird views put forward, and then they've got through. But don't worry, as Nigel Farage has said, our vetting process is the best. Doesn't really seem like it with the number of councillors that they're losing. So he put this down to, of course, a large number of candidates, a less established voting process, and of course the unexpected challenges, of course, of being a councillor, which is, of course, I think is the biggest one. And we've seen that. We've seen these people in council chambers. We've talked about it constantly since then, not really being prepared to be a councillor. Why? Because again, the perception is being a councillor is just easy. You don't do any work. That is the general perception. Oh, yeah, and you know they waste your money. You know, all the taking, you know, backhanders. You know, that's why you want to be a councillor. So all those, you know, brown envelopes you get under the table. I am yet surprised we have not had any corruption scandals yet in one of these reform councils. However, I think give it time, it'll happen eventually. Quite frankly, but it wouldn't surprise me when one happens eventually. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But as always, let me know what you think about this. I'm here, there, and everywhere today on this video. I will admit that. But as always, thank you very much. Do click on the like, share, and comment button down below. And of course, we'll see you all next time.